Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's class. Acknowledge you can hear me. Okay, so today's class, I'll try to make today's class very short because the weather is so bad here, and it has the potential of disturbing our class, right? So while we have a good internet, let's just try to see how we can move with pace. Okay. So today we'll be looking at testing React applications, so testing components and testing React applications generally, right? So first question, why are we testing a React application, right? Number one, we're testing a React application because we want to prevent bugs before production. We want to ensure components behave as expected. So you want a scenario where if you have a button that is supposed to do a particular thing, you want to be sure that that button does what it's supposed to do, right? You want to make refactoring safer so that you can refactor your code even while in production, right? Uh, Testing also builds confidence in shipping features, okay? So we have different types of testing. We have unit tests. For unit tests has to do with testing small isolated pieces, right? So let's say you are testing like button components, card components, and stuff like that. Those are like unit tests, you know. So probably you're testing like how does the button render with the correct label, or does the on click on the button work as it's supposed to work, right? Then we also have integration tests. Integration tests has to do with multiple components working together, right? So maybe you're testing if clicking the button updates the to-do list. So let's assume that you have a to-do list and you want to check if actually when I click this button to add a to-do item, it updates my to-do list, right? Now that's a unit test because now you're not only testing the button, you're testing the button and the feature and the actions that that button is supposed to take, okay? Then we have end-to-end test, which we call E2E, right? So that's where you're testing the app like a real user in the browser, okay? So you're trying to see, okay, can the user log in? Can that user add a to-do list, a to-do item, and see it on the screen? Now that's a way of that's integration testing. So now you're testing holistically a particular feature, right? As a user. Then we use different tools for testing. We have Jest, we have React testing library, and we have Playwright, or you can call it Cypress. Okay, so Cypress is used for E2E browser automation, and then React testing library is used for testing React components like user interaction, like it's used to test interaction between components, right? Then Jest is used to is used for testing the your like running your test cases. Okay. So there's what we call the TDD TDD cycle too. That is test-driven development. So for test-driven development, it's like it has a flow called the red-green refactor. Okay. So for red-green refactor, the whole idea is at the red stage, you write a failing test first. Then you write just enough code to make it pass. That is, you write the failing test. Then you write your code to pass that failing test. Then you can now refactor. Then the last step is refactor the code for readability and maintainability. Okay, so that's why I call it red-green refactor. That's why I call the cycle red-green refactor. Okay, are we following so far? Are we together? Okay. All right, cool. So advantages of testing your application, right? So it forces clear requirements. It makes sure that the design is better. It prevents over-engineering and also encourages confidence when refactoring. Okay, so remember I talked about refactoring earlier, where I said that the fact that you've tested the application makes it easy to refactor. So now you have a test case that's running, and you have already got this test case to fail, right? So when refactoring your code, now you're refactoring it to pass that test case. In that scenario now, it makes it, you have a little bit more confidence because you already know what you're trying to achieve, and your test case already enforces that process, okay? All right. So basically, so let's go ahead and see all this in action, okay? So like I always do, I have already installed the testing libraries. So what I'll do is I'll drop the command to install your dependencies for testing in the text box, okay? And then since Udo is not in the class today, I would like Soliana to collate these links or any link that I drop and share it with the whole class in the Discord channel, okay? Solana, did you get that? Or Soliana, yeah? Soliana, are you with us? So I don't know if I should give that responsibility to another person. Okay, so Suliana is not responding. So let's Excel, you go ahead and collate the links and drop them on the Discord channel for everybody, especially for those who will be watching this class on YouTube. Okay? Can you all still hear me? So I'm sure you're following. Are we together? Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I guess the others are not hearing. So David, do what I said Selena and Excel should do. So drop the link for the rest of the class. Okay? So yeah, so I dropped the link in the text box. So copy that, collate all the links that I will drop in the text box and share it to your colleagues on Discord. Cool. All right. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and see what we have to do. So basically, after utilizing this link, this command that I dropped in the text box, you can install, because we're using Vite with React, we can use this command to install our dependencies, okay? Now, moving forward, you want to update your package.json to have the necessary uh, script for running your test, right? So here you can see that I have written the script for running the test with Vitest, okay? And then We can also add other scripts like test watch, and then for test watch, we want to add byte test, byte watch, and then we can add test UI. Okay, so all these we can add as scripts that we can use to run different levels of tests. Now, for our test to work, we need to create a file called setuptest.js. Now, when we create this setup test, we want to import our testing library / jest DOM into this particular file. So this file should be at the root of your application. Okay. Then we want to update our byte config. Okay. Now you see that inside the byte config, I've added a test object where I have the globals of true. Now for this global true, all I'm doing is I want to use describe it expect without imports. Okay. So that this one makes everything global without importing. I don't need to import any of this. Okay. Now I'm also defining the environment to simulate browser DOM. Okay. And then I'm also setting up files, which is what I did here, this setup test.js. I'm also setting that up and importing that file over here. Okay. All right. Acknowledge we are together. You're following. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a component. So I would like to remove all this code from this so that we can have like fresh code. So let's see. Okay, let's just ignore and just utilize our component folder. So let's go ahead and create a component and call it counter. Okay. Counter dot JSX. Okay. Now for this counter, we want to have a simple counter component, correct? So let's go ahead and import just RFCE. So let's go ahead and modify this. So for this, we want to export default function of counter. Okay. All right. So for this counter now, we have an initial count state of 0, right? Where we have our our state, use state, and we've created a state and we've initialized it to 0. Okay. So what we want to do is update that state, right, using the function set count to update the state over here and say count plus 1, increment, and count minus 1, decrement. So let's utilize just the increment for now. So you can use the same example for the increment to handle your reduction, right? So now we have our count component created, and we want to write a test case for this count component. Okay. So what we'll do now is create so let's first of all group this and call it counts. Then let's bring our count component inside there. Now we want to create a test file for it, and for that we want to create a counter dot test dot JSX. Okay. So we now have a counter component and we have a test file, right? So basically what we want to do is we want to make sure that this counter component is doing exactly what it should do. Okay. So we'll come into our counter component. Ideally, we should write our counter test case first before writing the component, because we want it to be a failing test. Then we want to now write our component to pass that test. Okay. But in this case, let's go ahead and, since we have our component already created, let's go ahead and write our test. So first we want to import render and screen from testing library React. Okay. So now that we've imported this, so as you can see, it's from the testing library that we are importing render and screen. Okay. So don't get confused with that. We also want to import hold on. We also want to import user event, okay, from testing library user event. Okay. So all these are included in the installation that we did earlier. Okay. Now, lastly, we want to import our counter. Okay. We want to import our counter component because that's what we want to test. Correct. So we can go ahead and now start writing our test case. So in this scenario, we want to describe first. We want to describe our counter. Okay. So arrow function. And then you will notice that I am going to be grouping these test cases for readability purpose. Okay. So I'll differentiate the test cases that I want to perform. Okay. So that it's easy for whoever comes into my code to like easily understand that, okay, this is what I was trying to achieve with this particular test case. Okay. So now I want to say it that I should render, so it should render with initial state with an initial value of 0. Okay. That is a description of what this test case of what this application should do. So I'm saying for this counter, anytime that this counter renders, it should render with an initial state of initial value of 0. Okay. Then equals to, then we could now say render counter. Okay. So I mount the component into the JS DOM. Now, what I'm doing here is mounting the component into the JS DOM. Remember that I talked about the JS DOM earlier. Okay, so the JS DOM, hold on. So the JS DOM is part of the testing library. Okay, and what it's supposed to help you do is simulate the browser. Okay, simulate an action or simulate actions as if it is a user that is using the particular or that is testing the particular application. Okay, now when I have done this, I can now expect that on screen. So I want to get by test ID of count. Okay, and then I want to expect that get by test ID of count to behave to have text content count 0. Okay, so if you come here, you see that I have added a test test ID to this particular component, correct? Now, for me to I'm accessing this here using this get by test ID, and I'm getting that particular ID, which is count. And I'm saying for the component that has this particular ID, the initial value here should be 0. Are we together? Do we understand so far? Okay. All right. So because our test value now is if this component renders initially and this count value is 0, this test should pass. Okay? Are we good? So let's go ahead and run this test and see if we have a passing test. So our test is failing for now. We'll get to see why eventually. So let's see why it's failing. Give me a second, everyone. All right, so our test was it was failing because we did not have our use states installed, okay? Imported rather, okay? So now that it's imported, you can see that our test case is passing, right? One test and it's passing because initially this particular value is going to be 0 because we have already set our initial value to 0. Okay. So if I change it and say 3, and I also update this and say I want the initial value to be 0, to be 3. All right. Count 3. It should still pass the test. So it's failing. So let's see why it's failing. Mm, Do I have text contents? Mhm. Okay, so it's still receiving count 0, which is why. So, okay, I see the issue. Yeah, we did not save the counter component. So as you can see, we are now saying we are expecting it to have value 3, and the text should be count of 3, right? And our test case is passing. I believe this is something that we should understand like we should understand. Is it clear? Do we understand so far? Soliana, Michelle, you are in class today. Okay, nice to have you. So are we clear? Do you understand so far, Michelle? Udo, I know you, I've seen your message. You were late today. Yeah, but it's fine. I hope you are following. Yes, yeah, Michelle, you're welcome. Yeah. All right, excellent. That's what I like to hear. So let's go ahead and look at another test case. Okay. So we have this test case now is we just ascertain that this is doing what it should do, which is saying for this test ID, we want the particular count initially, and we're able to get that particular count initially. Okay. So now we can change this back to 0 because our initial state should be 0 ideally. So we want to have another test case. And for this test case, we want to say, we want to test this button. Okay? So now if we come here and we say the button, that is it, and then we now say increment, increments the count when button is clicked. Okay? And then for this, it should be an async function. And then we can now check. Can now say render. Remember why we are using the render. Don't forget, we're trying to mount the component here. And then I want to say await user event. Remember, we already brought user event into this our test file, right? From user event test library / user event. So what we want to utilize that user event. So we want to find the button by its visible text increment and click it, right? So we want to await dot click, right? And then screen dot get by text. Get by text increment. Okay. Then we should expect screen. Okay. All right. We should expect it to have text content count 1. Okay. Are we good? So what we've done now is we're now checking the button. We're now saying, yes, we're now saying, so we want to check this button and then we want to wait for an event of click. Then access that button based on the text, get by text, right? Increment. The is that when all this happens, this count value, when we get by text ID count, the count value should be 1. Okay? So if we save this, you see that we have our two tests being passed over here, right? Because now what's happening is that actually after an on click, we have an extra, the count has an extra value added to it. Are we following? Are we good? So with this now, we have written our test case for this particular component, right? This small component. So you can actually utilize these methods to like write tests for other complex scenarios, right? Okay. So let's see if we can look at another example. So let's see if we can help others who don't understand so far understand better. Okay. So let's have like a form. Okay. So let's create a form component. And then for this component, we want to have sign up from the JSX. Okay. So let's import. Okay. Let's utilize export default. Okay. So for this, definitely we want to have some use state. So let's say const name, set name, and then okay, so let's just utilize error. Okay. So let's go ahead and do submit. Okay. And then as I will submit. Okay. All right. That works. Okay, so we now have our components created, right? So let's just bring the onSubmit into our form component, okay? All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what, let's add our error message, okay? Okay, all right, let's go ahead and now, okay, we have this error message here already. So we can now go ahead and write our test case. So first thing you want to look at over here, you can see that we have like a lot of things that we've defined within these components, right? We have our on to submit, we have our form, we have input fields for name and for email, and we also have a button, right? So writing a test case for this component, we would want to include um, uh, as many test cases to make sure that we satisfy everything that we have in this component, okay? So let's go ahead and create our test file, okay? So let's call it, so let's give it the same name, sign, sign up form, the test, test.jsx, okay? So you can see that it's failing already because there's no test case written in it, okay? And we are still running our test at the moment. All tests still running. So let's go ahead and write our test case. So first thing we want to do is check. Let's import the necessary files that components that we need. So import member render from test library React. And then we also want to import screen. Okay. Then we want to have our event, import user events, and then we also want to import our components. Import sign up form. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start writing our test, okay? So for this test scenario now, we want to satisfy first the sign up form. So let's describe the form, okay? So let's say sign up form. And then for sign up form, hold on guys. I don't want this automation. So for sign up form, we want to say the sign up form should the sign up form should submit user data when valid. Okay. Then for that, it's on sync. Okay. And then we want to say render no, it should be on submit. Okay. Yeah, so we need to define our submit here, just.fn. Okay. So now that we have our render written, right, we want to now go ahead and check other scenarios, right? I want to say await user event dot type. And then I want to say screen dot get by placeholder. Folder text. And then we want to utilize the placeholder text. So if you come back to your form, you now say, okay, the placeholder text we have is name and email. So let's say enter name, and then let's say enter email. Okay. So if we're accessing these input fields based on their placeholder text, we want to use enter email. Okay. And then we say David Edu. Okay, so that's like we're just giving an example of what enter name should do. Okay, so we can repeat the same thing for email, and then this will be enter email. Hold on. Okay, so I see where the issue is text. Okay, then we can have like David at, okay, all right. And then we also have the button, right? And for the button, so we're going to remove this. So we're getting by text too, okay? And by text, if we come here, we see that the text on our button is sign up. So let's just rather call it submit. Okay, let's use submit. And then we can use submit. Okay. So is yes, definitely. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of testing your application. You're testing every case in your application. So as you can see now, we have tested but we have also added the button scenario, right? And then we can now expect, okay, expect on submit, okay, that to have, we expect the on submit to have been called with the value name and email. Okay, so what we are saying here is that we're expecting that when this on submit is called, it should have a name value and an email value. Okay, now that we have this case done, hold on. So let's close this one. Let's close this. Okay. So if we save this, so we still have one test case failing. Okay. So let's figure out why that test case is failing. And it has to do with just.fn. Okay. Okay, so there's an unhandled error. Let me figure it out. Hold on. Submit. Submit name value, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the submit is giving us issue and submit is not defined. It's not defined, it's defined. Undo submit. Okay, so let's write the let's write the field test. So hold on. So it shows error and does not call on submit. Oh my God. when invalid. Okay. I'm going where it should be. Okay. So hold on, guys. Let's just debug why the test is failing, okay? So I want to expect screen and get by row. Allowed to have text content or please fill. All fields are required. Okay. So let's go back to our error. All fields are required. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and try this out now. Okay, so one test is passing and one is still failing. So I think the second test is passing and the other is still failing. All right, so I'll get to look deeper into why the first test is failing, but you pretty much understand what we are trying to achieve here using utilizing this testing by testing the application, right? So are we following so far? So what's the placeholder exactly? Okay, so hold on, let me see what Udo just said. Enter email text, yeah. Like get by placeholder text. Placeholder text, yeah. Hmm.
Sorry, sir, I'm unmuting. You know that the type for your for email is email. Then in the text, in the check the function that is um making the text, that's user event dot type screen get by placeholder. Instead of putting text, instead of putting email, you put text there.
Yeah, so it's the placeholder text we're accessing. So we're not assessing the type. We're assessing the
Oh, okay.
placeholder text. So the placeholder text is enter email. And for this one, the
Oh,
placeholder
okay.
text is enter name. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's what we're assessing here, like get by placeholder text, right? Then for the button, we are getting by text. That's by the text in the button. So like we're getting by this summit that's written, like the text for the button. Do you get? But the issue is saying that it's the on submit is not imported or is not available. That's the issue. But I've already imported that. Mm. So over here, under submit. So inside the form, that's where we're having the issue. Mhm. Okay, I see the issue now. So actually the on submit did not exist earlier. Okay, so our test case should pass now. Okay, are we good? Yeah, okay. All right. Udo, do you understand so far? Um, Dave, Amosu, and Excel. Michelle, okay, yeah, Michelle understands. Okay. Where is Soliana? Soliana, are you following the class so far? All right, okay. All right, so our test case is now going through, okay? So you can see that now we've tested um, the fact that we're adding content, we've tested the content, we've tested the input fields, right? We've also tested the button, the submit scenario. We've also made sure that it must have values before we can submit. And then we also wrote a test case for when there is no content. That is when it is not, when the content does not exist, when it's invalid, okay? Yeah, okay, Dave. Yeah, you can watch the class again now. Happy? So at least I think we handled like two examples, so it should give you some clarity when you sit on your own and watch it again. Okay? Dave, are we good? So what you need to understand about the difference between this test, this test I just did now, right? This is an integration test. Okay? Remember, I already explained the difference between integration test and unit test. Now, for this, when testing just a button, right, or just a H1 tag, that's unit test. Do you understand? But when you're testing like a form component, we are now testing a whole component in this scenario, in this form scenario. We tested the whole form component to make sure that everything about this form works perfectly and integrates with submission too perfectly. So that means we've taken care of the form itself and we've also handled the submission process of the form. Okay, in this test case, which qualifies this as an integration test process, right? Because it assesses that multiple parts are working fine. So we have input, validation, and then we also have callbacks. and all of them are working together and they are working perfectly. That's why we now have our test case is passing, all right? Hold on, sorry. Okay. So as you can see that all the test cases we've written are all passing. That's we have the count component and then we have our form component, okay? Let me see if we still have time to take one more example. Okay. So let's go ahead and take one more example. Are we together? Yes, definitely. So at the end of the day, like you're already testing this form, so you can go ahead and like look at other methods of testing your form. Like this, like a very simple implementation of a form component that I have tested here, right? Definitely you can write your test case for a formic form, right? In that case, now you know what you're trying to achieve with your formic form. So when writing your test case, you know what you're testing for and what you are expecting. Okay. So that way now you can still write your test and achieve pass your test normally. Now this is very important, like in development. Like I said, it helps give confidence to into production. So it helps you ship confident code, right? So let's go ahead and have a simple list component, okay? So close this, close this. Mm, let's just have, let's create a new one. Let's call it list comp. And then, yeah, definitely you do. You push your test. List comp, so let's list JavaScript. Okay. Okay, so for this component, so for this very component, we are going to mm, hold on, export one function. Okay, so for this component, we are going let's const users and set users, and then let's have const loading and set loading. Okay, then we want to use effect, and for use effect, we want to have an async function. We want to have an async function that loads the users. Okay, and let's have a try block. and const response equals to await fetch. So let's use this JSON placeholder API, okay? All right, are we following? So we're getting users from the JSON placeholder API. They want to set users, and then you can now have this. Then finally, you can set loading to false, okay? All right. Then we load the data. Okay, now that we have this, let's if loading, we want to have a loading state, okay? And then so that we don't waste time, we already understand what we're doing with mapping our list. So are we good so far? So what we just did now is have a simple component that is supposed to list out our users, okay? Are we good? So we can go ahead and create our list comp dot test dot JSX, okay? And that should fail automatically. All right. So remember that we want to utilize some so let's add wait for. Okay. And then let's also have our user events. Okay. Then we want to import our list. Want to import our list component, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and describe our list component. Okay. So for the list component, before we want to say before each, right? And for before each, we want to clear all our dummy, our mock, all the mocks that we have, right, in our application. So basically what we do with the importation we did earlier over here, this importation is like a form of creating a mock of this on summit, okay? Are you following? So over here now, we want to clear out all mocks first, all right, by saying before each, I want to vi from vest and then dot restore all mocks, not restart, restore all mocks, and okay. Now we can go ahead and now define our test case, okay? So let's say it shows users after fetching, okay? And this should be an async function that's vi dot spy on over fetch. So this should be mock result value once. Okay. So I'm going to explain this, so don't get confused, okay? I'll come back and explain it. Okay, so let me explain what this VI does again, okay? So this VI is from Vitest. Vitest. So what we are doing is in this at this stage, what we are doing is we are creating a mock, like a mock value to simulate what that particular action is supposed to do. So you are expecting user information, correct? So what you want to do is you want to mock that user information that is coming so that you can write your test. Your test now should be able to know what is expecting. So what the test is expecting is a JSON file of user information that contains ID and name. Okay, so this VI is helping you mock the global fetch function to resolve with fake JSON. Okay, so now when you have resolved with that fake JSON, now you can now render your component and handle other test case scenarios. Exactly. So now you can now come here and expect get by text loading to be in the document. So for loading, we might want to come back here and confirm, okay, and then we can now go back. So here we're saying we want to check by text if we have this loading. So if we have this loading, it should pass this very test, okay? Then we want to also await and then wait for hold on guys. And then wait for expect screen, then gets by label text user list. So the label text is user list, okay? As you can see here, user list. And then we're saying to be in the document, okay? So wait for cannot find name, wait for, did you mean? Sorry, with for, yeah. Okay. Now we can also expect screen and then expect screen. Okay. All right, let's test this. Let's check out this test case and see. Okay, so we have our test failing. So get by text, and then what's okay, get by text. And I want to find elements with the text loading. This could be because the text is broken up by multiple elements. In this case, you can provide a function for your text matcher to make your matcher more flexible. Ignore notes, comments, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the first failure we are experiencing is at the level of get by text loading. Okay. So if we go back to our component, so this is what we're trying to test in that scenario. Okay. So let's go ahead and change this and say, so use area label. Not really. Hold on, guys. So let's give it data test ID of loading, okay? Then let's go ahead and change this to get by test ID. Okay, so let's see if, okay, so our test is still failing, get by test ID is still failing. Why? Okay, let's see if others will pass without that scenario. Okay. So this case is not still passing. Okay. So it seems like all our test cases are passing, are failing for this particular example. So what we'll do is, okay, so we have some that have passed. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the failed test cases in our next class because of time, okay? So do well not to miss the next class, okay? We'll look at like one or two more test cases. I think just two more test cases, then two more examples, then we'll be done with testing React applications, okay? So I will advise that you go ahead and explore your own, do your own research so that you don't get lost. Go ahead and watch the video again, okay? So that you can understand better. We would come back again in our next class, hopefully on Monday, and then we can further buttress on what we've learned today. Okay. Are we good? Excel. Okay, Udo, you're good. All right. Michelle, you're good. So, Liana, how about you? Are you good? Excel, are you good? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Okay, so with that, we can bring today's class to an end. And I look forward to seeing you guys in our next class. Have a pleasant day and an excellent weekend. Don't forget, we have a meeting tonight for onboarding into the project phase. So I'm not sure that's something you want to miss. So make sure that you don't miss that session. Join that session so you understand everything that's coming up in the project phase. Then I also encourage everybody to try and complete your stage 7 tasks before the deadline because it's very important. If you don't meet that deadline, then you've automatically just put yourself out of the opportunity. You lost the opportunity to have an automatic internship, right? So completing that stage 7 automatically gives you access to the internship stage. Okay. But the certificate is very awesome too. So if you can't meet up, well, I really want you to meet up. So yeah, try and complete your tasks. Make sure you submit before the deadline. I really want to see all of you make it. Okay. Thank you and God bless. Bye everyone.